Hello, I'm Andrew with the Bangs. On today's episode, I speak with a friend of mine who I know as Eric's Electrons. He has quite the Instagram following, and that is what he calls himself there. He is majoring in physics and often posts rather hilarious science memes. Now, we're not talking about science today, though. I wanted to speak with him about his experience of the events of the past few weeks with regards to the murder of George Floyd. I wanted to hear what he thought about the protests and about the sort of uprising that has ensued, and also just about his experience as a Black man in America. I was rather surprised by a number of his perspectives and really taken aback by how forgiving he is and how well he understands that people are people. Please leave me a comment, give me a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Eric, my science friend. That's how I kind of have come to know you.
What's up?
Yeah,
The
so
science guy.
yeah, it's gonna be the science guy. It's gonna be not really like about science today though.
Yeah. That's
I
not
mean
at all.
maybe. I mean
Yeah. Maybe we'll work a
statistics.
little science in there.
Yeah, but not
Yeah.
not quite. We'll get you in for another time where we can discuss your specialty. But actually, do you want to give a little bit of a background for you, just talking about like what you are doing, like you're the Eric's Electrons fella.
Yeah. Well, I'm almost in my third year of my physics and mathematics degree. I'm a double major, and right now I just recently got a chance to do an internship for researching about black holes and categorization of black holes, and also talking about like what makes up the mass of a black hole, like accretion disks and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
So like that's really exciting. But with all this COVID stuff going on, that's like not for sure. So that's what I'm working on. And yeah, other than that, I've just been writing and causing trouble on the internet.
Awesome. The best. Okay, let's move on to the topic. You sent me a picture of like different intersecting. You didn't send it to me. Gosh, you're like, hey Andrea, look at this. No, you just put it up. You just put it up on Instagram, and it sort of sparked some like, oh, this is something that maybe should be talked about. It was just different intersecting. What is that called? The Venn diagram.
Venn diagram, yeah.
But like of 6 circles. So
Yeah,
it made
yeah,
a flower.
actually, yeah. It was like three big circles, and then it has little tiny sections inside of it.
And
Yeah,
then I think so it was just concerns about what's going on right now with regards to George Floyd and the protests slash riots slash looting slash whatever else. Can you describe? Actually, can you talk about the different categories that were in that?
Oh yeah. From my memory, there was one that said you could think that George Floyd dying was a tragedy, and then in another circle it says something like you could think rioting and looting is a bad thing, and in another circle it says you could think that the officers involved should be arrested, and a whole bunch of other things. And basically the idea was that you could believe in all of these things. You don't have to believe in one or the other, or just be so one track minded when it comes to these social issues, like a lot of people on the internet seems to kind of give into in a way. It's kind of weird to me.
Why is it weird?
I mean, maybe it's just because I spend a lot of time on the internet, but I don't spend too much time dibble dabbling in like the trendy topics. So I don't spend time with people who talk in that sphere.
Okay.
So whenever I'm reading or something, I'm reading people that have a nice, very nuanced opinion about things, and they go into detail about things, and they provide evidence, and it's very fact based, very evidence based. And when people are just saying like, oh, what George Floyd shouldn't have died and all cops are bad, like I'm just like, wait, you don't have to like be totally extreme on one end, and then forget about the fact that most cops don't kill other people, you know.
Hmm.
um, you just don't have to do that. So it's just a little weird for me to see people engage in that type of black and white thinking,
Hmm. Do
I
you
think.
can you tell me, like, from when the video came out regarding, like, with the murder of George Floyd to now, can you kind of go through in your head from your perspective what you thought about the progression?
Yeah, so okay, when I heard about it a couple of days later from when it went viral, and then I was like, oh, here we go again. But let's wait, because I ever since a lot of people don't notice about me, but I was hardcore Black Lives Matter when it first started. I'm talking about like Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, you know, hands up, don't shoot. I
Hmm.
was hardcore Black Lives Matter. But it wasn't until after those cases ended where I just completely severed my ties with them, because one, the founders as well as the most outspoken voices of Black Lives Matter, they never came to say like, oh, we were wrong about X, Y, and Z, and actually this didn't happen. They kept up with the lie that Michael Brown, for instance, said hands up, don't shoot, and then got shot, even though the ballistic results and the DNA evidence and all that other stuff said otherwise. So from that point, I knew that you have to wait for more evidence to come out. No matter how crazy it may look, no matter what's on the video, you just have to wait. So that was my first instinct. It was just like, okay, just wait, just see how this plays out, see what comes out, see what happens beforehand. And then, when things start coming out, it was just like, okay, well, this officer is mostly in the wrong, this, that, and the third. And I live 15 minutes away from Georgia State University, which is the school I attend. And going down there, it was getting crowded and stuff. And I looked on Twitter and I see people vandalizing the CNN building, and they were blowing up police cars, stomping on random cars in the street, and doing all this other stuff. And I just thought that was terrible. And I was posting about it, like saying like, what does this do? I was like, I was one of those people. But I also provided like, I also put out the statement like, look, what happened to George Floyd, obviously wrong, but this does nothing. Like, we've seen this happen many times where we, riot and loot, and nothing good comes of it. All these businesses are hurt. There are many people left to clean the city up, and it's there's more costs than benefits. So I went out there the following day to clean up, and there was a lot to clean up. I only stayed out for like 2 hours because I went out on an empty stomach. So I left kind of early. And soon after that, I was really curious about the protests, because you're hearing all about these protests.
Hmm.
So I think it was that Monday I went to a protest, and it was at the same place where a lot of the vandalism happened, a lot of the rioting happened in downtown Atlanta on Georgia State University campus or around that campus. And it was peaceful for the most part. I mean, later on, there was a very small group of people who stay after just to agitate the cops, throw water bottles and stuff. And obviously, they got tear gassed, and they try to make it a thing like police were brutalizing them or something. But I clearly saw that there were people agitating on that end. So now I have more of a wide range perspective on you know the things that are going on, at least here,
Hmm.
and through what I've seen on the internet. Of course, I have a little bit more of a nuanced view. So that's pretty much what unfolded until now today.
So you did see, like, peaceful protests, as well as, like you said, a small group, but that ends up making things look big, I
Yeah, I
guess.
would say that the majority of the protests in Georgia, from what I've seen from my friends' Snapchats or their Instagram profiles, have been mostly peaceful. There hasn't been any issues, or a very small amount of issues, if any. But there are those agitators that are there in these various protests, and that's always interesting because you see the democratic socialist people or the Antifa people or people just spraying the anarchy sign everywhere. And, then you have like the older people in the audience who are like, hey, don't do that
Yeah.
right when they see that, because there was this time where it could have got really bad for a police officer. We were marching towards somewhere in Atlanta, and I remember hearing a police siren behind me, and the police officer just drove like into the crowd, but then he had to come to a stop, of course, or else he would have ran people over.
Hmm.
And people, they got agitated by that, so they started hitting on the police car and all this other stuff. But then there was an older guy there, and he was like, "Hey, let's not do that. Let's be calm." And he kind of broke everybody up and helped the police car get through the crowd because he was trying to get on the other side, and everything was good. But yeah, for the most part, I would say most of the protests here have been peaceful.
So when you went to the protest, were you going just to check it out to see, like, for yourself what was going on, or did you go with the intention of like protesting in mind?
I went mostly just to see what was going on because I'm very curious about that. I don't agree with a lot of the things in Black Lives Matter. Like, I don't disagree with everything about Black Lives Matter. Yes, I do think police brutality is an issue. No, I don't think that it's as big as of an issue that they make it out to be. But yeah, it was just mostly curiosity on my part.
Okay, so can we go into that a little bit
Mhm,
regarding the police brutality and racism?
mhm.
So, I mean, I do want to talk about stats with the stats with you. But first, how can you tell if the police brutality isn't fueled by racism? How do we know?
How I view it is we have to take it case by case because there's no way for us to read the mind of people doing these things. What we do see, no matter if the police force has a large amount of Black people or Hispanic people or whatever, we see the same type of aggressive tactics being used. So I think what we have to do is we have to take it case by case and we have to see if there's a racial element. I really don't know if we could just tell straight from just looking at a video, for instance, unless they say something racist on a video, and then we could look at their past and see if they've been aggressing nothing but a certain demographic. But even that is a little hard to do because maybe they live in a place, or not live, but they patrol in a place that's mostly of a certain demographic too. So to me, to automatically jump to that's racist is just the wrong thing to do. Instead, we should jump to whether that aggression was justified or was it not justified.
Okay, so do you mind if we talk a little bit about like the stats that are often given?
Yeah.
So
No, I don't want.
well, yeah, I figured because I think I mentioned it too, and you're like, yeah, let's talk about it. What I have here, and again, this is just one guy saying this, and so it might be off, but so in the US, Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed by the police than white people. So he's in the UK, so he says in the UK, 52% of people who die in police custody are Black, despite the Black community making up 3% of the population. So again, maybe the UK thing isn't relevant, but I imagine that the American stats aren't super different.
All right, so Black people were 24% of those killed, despite being only 13% of the population.
Okay,
Or what about the percentage of those committing crimes?
right, and that's relevant, right?
Yeah, that's very relevant.
Okay,
Hold on, let me look that up real quick.
okay, thank you. I
Yeah, no
appreciate
problem.
it.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you're the science fellow, so you know, looking up.
Oh yeah, that's crazy. I was I I had read a report by the government that was like from 1980s something to
Mm-hmm.
2008 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it really went into details about the trends in violent crime, or Black violent crime, and that was really eye-opening
What
in
were
any
the
way.
trends?
Crime was going down overall ever since the early 90s, because I think the early 90s is when it peaked.
Okay.
Um, but intraracial crime, meaning like, blacks killing whites and Hispanics or whatever, has sort of stagnated, but it's been higher for um, when it came to black offenders than it did for the other way around. And I think that that's a really good point to go on too, because a lot of the rhetoric is that it's black people are being executed and murdered by white people or cops all the time. But when you look at the actual statistics, although blacks make up 13% of the population, um, blacks kill whites at a higher number than whites kill blacks per capita. So that's kind of frightening.
Yeah, well, why do you think that is? Why do you think that's gone? You said it's more or less stagnated, but it's gone up with that in that one group. So why do you think that is?
Um, I really think it starts in the household. Like, to be honest, I think it really starts with the broken families and the fact that these cycles of bad behaviors, they tend to repeat itself when you don't have that father figure in the household. Like, I was really convinced by that by economists such as Walter E. Williams, or Milton Friedman even said something about it. But Larry Elder, a very conservative commentator, he always talked about it. And I was just looking up tons of info to fact check him. And
Mm-hmm.
I think he was pretty spot on when he was talking about that. So, yeah, I think it starts with the fatherless households, and then also the lack of education. I think I read something where it said a lot of black uh, seniors in high school are reading at an eighth grade level.
Mm.
That's really bad. And I think the lack of education in that regard, that contributes to, people committing acts of violence just across the board, and it doesn't mean that everyone has to go to college. Like, college is not for everyone, but learn a trade, or further your education in some way, shape, or form. And most people don't have that foundation, or that culture around them that values education as much as like other cultures do. So that's
Okay.
a big issue.
Do what what can be done to, I guess you said like the values in the home, but what can be done to help with regards to the education situation?
That's a really good question. So I think the first thing is, like, it starts with the parenting, because no matter what, if your parents don't push like this discipline on you to further your education or to be a top student or something like that, I just really don't think that you I just don't think that most kids will have the um, motivation to do well in school, because there's this book I'm reading right now called, I think it's Acting White or something. It talks about it,
I just heard
it
about it from Coleman Hughes.
yeah, and it basically talks about like the fact that in black culture, acting white are such things as like being very smart or studious, or uh, loving to read, and stuff like that. Like, you get made fun of stuff like that. I have, and where I grew up at, plenty of times, and that does deter people from valuing those things over things that are valued much more in those communities, like sports and entertainment. So yeah, I think a change in culture, definitely, but it really, really starts in the household with the parenting, because if it wasn't for my mom teaching me how to read at like 4 or 5 years old, I think I wouldn't be where I'm at right now. And for her to keep pushing education on me first and foremost, and um, making me love books and reading as much as I do, that has really changed my life, because I've learned so much through reading on my own, and discovering things on my own. Whereas, like, that basic skill set isn't taught in, I think, most black homes, and then that's the issue.
So, okay, I'm gonna ask this. If it's not like I can take it out. If you're like, yeah, that's no thanks, I'm not gonna answer that. So I heard Ethan Klein, is part of the H3 podcast,
Hmm.
talking about the police, and he mentioned about something that I'd heard about this, but he had never heard about the idea of most. I think he just said all, but like you can't say all, but most people in, say, a black family would be had a talk about the police, and that would have happened when they were young. That you have to watch out for the police. Did you have this?
Yeah, definitely. My dad taught me from when I was in elementary school, probably, that you there's a way that you could prevent issues with the police. Like, you know, always answer yes or no, sir. You know, keep it straightforward. If they're being a butthole about stuff, then take it up in the courts. Don't fight them in the streets because you won't win in the streets. You have to take them to court to win it. And even then, if you don't win it in court, well, hey, they have a complaint against them. This is on file. So if anything happens in the future, this could be used against them. So he's always taught me to think further than to be in the moment and just to be, rowdy or whatever. And I've seen him get pulled over when I was maybe 7 or something, and the cop being really like just aggressive toward him for no reason, and told him that he didn't have his seatbelt on, even though he did have his seatbelt on, and he drove off. It couldn't have been like 10 seconds down the road, and the police pulled us right over. And like the way he acted in that situation, how he was so calm, but after the situation, he was a little upset, but he went straight to the precinct and he filed a complaint, and he went through the process. I've seen him go through the process, and that was really important for me. So yeah, I've had that talk with my dad before.
So what? How does the fact that you did have that talk and that it was necessary for you to have that talk, and um, I don't want to maybe you I don't want to say as if you will, but I imagine you would have this talk with your children. Well, how does that make you feel though?
um I mean, see, I think it's important for anyone to have that talk. To be honest with you, I think no matter what race you are, you should have that talk with your children to basically lower the chances of of something happening to them, or for the police's paranoia to get the best of them. um, but I don't know, like I do feel on one hand, like I'm kind of like, yeah, it shouldn't have to be said. But then on another hand, it's kind of like, well, I understand how it is to be on the other side because I have family members who are in law enforcement. I've been to a police academy where they're in the middle of watching a video of someone, just casually, or not someone, but a cop casually getting shot at a routine traffic stop. Like they're shown these videos, and that's the reason why they're so on edge when they get out and actually to the streets, because they know that this can happen. So like I understand it from both points of view, and to me, to diffuse the situation, like to not act erratic or to give them too much problem seems to be the best way to prevent this. Because like even when we look at instances of police brutality, a lot of times it comes when people are resisting arrest in some type of way, and that could have been avoided. So, and then it's not to say that, of course, the person deserved to die or something because they resisted arrest. Of course not. But it is to say that it could have been avoided if they simply didn't resist arrest and take it up in court or something like that. And that goes for anyone that's white, black, or whatever.
Right. But do you think that the system, again, we were talking about racism and police brutality. So do you
Mhm.
think that it is more racist towards black individuals versus white though? Even just based on like hearing about the idea of having the talk, like I never had the talk about it. I asked my
Yeah.
husband and he didn't either.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think due to the fact that the history of policing has had racist elements to it, like that's definitely a thing. Um, and the fact that there has been a lot of foul play on behalf of police officers, that's kind of have been a tradition in a lot of non-white households. So maybe that's the reason, but I don't think that police are actually um, consciously or even implicitly discriminating against people because of their race. I just think that, you know, a lot of times, like say for instance, they get a call that a robbery just happened, and they have a description, you know, and when if they're in the area and someone fits that description and they pull them over, or they pull over and ask them questions because this person is walking and they fit the description, that's just a part of it, you know, like it has nothing to do necessarily with their racial prejudices, in terms of like their personal beliefs about a race, but it's about finding the suspect. So a lot of times we don't get to see why certain people are pulled over, and it's counterproductive to me to um, try to read the minds, or guess their racial intent.
And you're right about the individual. Like I
Mhm.
get that, but there's something about this whole, oh yeah, I had to have this talk and it was smart to have it because, like
Yeah,
like that seems really wrong to me that you had to have that, and that's part of why
yeah.
you haven't had troubles with the police, because you listened to your dad's advice. Like that doesn't sit well.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think like in a perfect world, I would not like that to happen. And I do think there was a racial element in the past when it came to policing. And I mean, I have family members who have said, like, you know, police pulled them over, took them in a car, and uh, beat them up or something, or harassed them a lot or something, and then uh, dropped them off somewhere, or just let them go or something like that. So, like, you know, this was like in the 70s and stuff. But yeah, I think that might have came from that. But I do think a lot of times, a lot of people, they act emotional when it comes to how police question them about things, and because a lot of police officers do sound accusatory, um, and it's been a thing where, you know, I think police officers have just been too paranoid, and um, you know, pulled the trigger on people unjustly sometimes. But yeah, I don't know, I do find that weird too, but I do understand it at the same time.
Okay, you're very fair about it. No wonder you're going into science. You're very like factually minded, which is good. But when I'm thinking from the emotional side, like that's the side that I'm like, but what about all of the anger and the...
Oh yeah, I mean, and that's valid too. That is valid. So I understand.
So okay, remember that stat that we were looking up?
Uh,
Did we find it? By
oh
we,
yeah.
I
Oh, I'm
mean
sorry.
you.
I
I
stopped.
know I
Yeah.
had no, no. We kind of did a bit of a tangent, but still within the police brutality thing. There are more white people shot though versus
Yeah.
black. So what is
Overall,
that? But that doesn't necessarily mean like black people are still more likely to be pulled over,
yeah. Mhm.
and that's just
Yeah.
sort of everyday America as opposed to crime America.
Yeah. Yeah. Because this, like, when you consider per capita numbers, black people are more likely to be shot because they make up a smaller percentage than white people do. But what's interesting about the statistic, when you turn it around and you mention the crime rates of that statistic, um, black people commit upwards of, let's say, I think it's most violent crime, and they only make up 13% of the population. So that's really bad also. So when you combine those statistics together, you understand that the incidences, or the chances of a certain group facing those police officers, or committing crimes, that increases their chance of having these disagreeable encounters with police officers and law enforcement.
So where does it where does this leave us? Because it's not. I don't think that it's the statistics can leave out, even though they're stats, but it can leave out the human element. And like I think that like, you know, a couple years ago, me coming on the Twitter scene and seeing the stats with, well, more white people are killed by the police than black people. So racism, not a thing. Like I would have maybe gone in that direction, but I don't I don't feel like that's right. Like I don't think that's right. I feel like it's not right and I think it's not right. But what do you think?
I just think that when we when we come to these statistics, we have to come with a blank slate. Like if our first instinct is I have to either prove it's racism or disprove it's racism, I think that's the wrong way to go. Instead, we have to look at these statistics as they are and then find out what contributes to those statistics. And then if we can find some type of racist element in that search of just looking up all the factors, then cool, you know. But if we can't outright, I don't think that there's a reason to try to disprove or prove racism when it comes to those statistics,
Okay,
because they're just, you know, results.
they're just results. Well,
Yeah.
so with regard to the Black Lives Matters, like Black Lives Matter.
Mhm.
With regard to that movement, you said that you know you were initially on board, but then sort of jumped off the bandwagon because of um, following through with the results, and you didn't think that the leaders of those movements really did. But you mentioned also that you're not against it. They just didn't really follow through like you would have hoped. So, what are elements that you do agree with?
um so I agree that there needs to be a better relationship between police and civilians. Like I really do think that there needs to be a much more cohesive relationship there, because for a very long time there has been a lot of hostility on both ends. And maybe we need to go to other countries with less police violence or something, but we need to learn how. I think police need to be trained more how to de-escalate situations, and maybe that will require more training, I don't know. But I do agree there. I do agree that there are some loopholes in the judicial system that leave people without good representation when it comes to lawyers and stuff. I do agree there. I basically disagree with almost everything else, though, that, you know, the judicial system is like this massively racist place and police are executing black people, as many of the loudest voices of Black Lives Matter say. And and that all of this racism is rooted under white supremacy that's trying to um, spread its white supremacy by brutalizing blacks. I don't agree with all of that part.
Okay, so this leads me to the next part of things I was going to ask you about what do you think about white privilege and about what's good about it and what's not so good about it, strengths and weaknesses.
um I see. Maybe I don't have the creative imagination to think of too many good things about it. I'm trying. I think I think white privilege, the concept, it's good only for looking inward and then maybe seeing like, okay, am I biased or paranoid when it comes to this? And how do I talk about other races whenever they're not around and stuff like that? I think it's good maybe on that end, but again, you don't even need that concept to do that. It just takes a lot of introspection on your part. Where it's bad, I mean, I, I can make a whole podcast based on that, but I, I think a lot of it is rooted in guilt of past injustices that have nothing to do with most people who are alive today.
Uh-huh.
I think a lot of it is kind of that. It's like that hero type of mentality. Like, oh, I have to save these people
The
because
what is that called? White
yeah, I don't
savior.
know what it's called. Yeah, yeah, something like that. Yeah, like the a white savior, white knighting, or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is rooted in that. And it also, to me, it's a slap in the face because it's like, so you're saying that you have power over me, and your white privilege basically, basically you're using your power to, someone put it really well in a tweet, but basically, like, the concept of white privilege is that white people, no matter if they're poor, rich, whatever, all come with this privilege in life where they get to, they're waived for many things that non-whites like blacks, Asians, Hispanics aren't waived for. And um and that privilege is the reason why they have success, and it's why a lot of non-whites don't have success. And to me, what that says is the people who think that they have it, they're superior over everyone else. And I don't buy that. Like, I just, I mean, again, I try to say to people, like, what type of privilege does Beyonce and Jay-Z not have that the average white person has, you know? And that doesn't mean that I don't think that people have privileges. Like, I think men have privileges when it comes to certain things. I think women have privileges when it comes to other things. We all might have privileges in certain arenas, but this large, like, broad brush of privilege, by race, it's just not a helpful concept, I think. And there's a lot more wrong with it than good, and it contributes to the inferiority complex of those who are not white,
Okay,
and then that's why I think it's harmful.
because is it the idea the soft bigotry of low expectations?
Exactly, yeah. And on top of that, it, like, just imagine going through life saying, every time when you fail, like, I didn't get this because I'm white, or if I was white, I would have got this, you know? I just don't think that many people who are not white, they wouldn't have made it to where they are if it had that type of mindset. So yeah, it's a horrible thing to believe.
Well, because okay, so I think that some of it is the language of the word privilege.
Mhm.
Because I used to be really against it in the same space where you were, but I I sort of for me it feels like a naivety has been sort of removed,
Mhm.
where just the idea of, oh, like the example of the police talk thing, like I didn't have that. I know you said it wouldn't be a bad thing to tell people, like when you get pulled over, here's how you act. um and actually maybe I don't know, I don't want to say that my mom may have done like a, you got your license, or here, or when you start driving, here's what you do, but it wasn't in a sort of, make sure you be careful, like what you were describing. Like I didn't have to do that. And some would use the word because I have white privilege, but I don't think of it in that way. I think of it as different experiences that I didn't have to go through, um that you did. And the same of, like, I've never had anything racist done against me that I know of. um that is a way that I've gone about life, that I haven't had to deal with that. And I know it's not okay to just blanket statement everybody, but there are people groups that generally in common have this thing that I don't. So I think it could be, you could just say empathy. It doesn't, like you could replace the white privilege thing of like, oh, I'm gonna put myself in your shoes and try to think about like, oh, that isn't something I've had to deal with, and it just helps. That's why I see the idea of like my naive worldview of like, that happens to people, like it's like, oh yes, it does.
Yeah.
Yes. Is that more palatable, or are you still like, no?
I mean, it makes sense because but I just don't understand. racializing it. It's just kind of like, for instance, like women get a different talk from a young age than men do when it comes to like how to do this or how, like, I hear a lot of women being taught, like, whenever they're children, like, oh, don't, like, spread your legs open on the subway or something, or don't eat like this, or don't do this, or don't do that. And then guys are taught, like, you know don't say this to women, or don't act this way to people, or don't go in that car with a stranger, or something. Like, I think every group has their things that are taught, and we could, and they shouldn't have it shouldn't have to be that way. But the reality of the situation is, like, due to, I mean, just how people are, like, we have to teach one another that. And um I just don't think that the I just don't think the concept of white privilege requires a racial element to it. Like, I think that empathy is a thing that all people should,
Cultivate and
yeah,
yeah.
should practice and stuff like that. It's a very useful concept, and especially now, I think people who are not cops should practice empathy towards cops. They're people. These people are putting their life on the line, and not all of them are bad. I mean, if that were the case, we would see a crazy amount of shootings, but we see more civilians killing civilians than cops killing civilians. So, obviously they're not all just these horrible killers or something, like the one that killed George Floyd. So yeah, I just, I don't find
You don't like the racializing of it. It's not
yeah,
that
yeah, I
that's the
just don't
part.
like realizing of it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. What, if you don't mind me asking, what area did you grow up in? Did you grow up in a black neighborhood or mixed or white or how?
Yeah, so I grew up in Oakland, California for like the first 4 years of my life, which was mostly black. And then I grew up in Pittsburgh, California, which was more mixed. The neighborhood, I had, like, a couple Asian neighbors, I had a couple Mexican neighbors, a couple black neighbors, a couple white neighbors. When I first moved there were more, I would say, white neighbors than there were when I left. But I would say the place where I grew up at the most, that it had a mixed environment.
Do you think that makes a
Mostly.
difference if you grow up in a mixed neighborhood versus like all white or all black?
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah, it makes a huge difference, because going over a friend's house that's Mexican, you get to see their culture, and how they are. We're going over someone who's Indian, you get to see their culture and what they eat, and how they are, and you could empathize with them more and stuff. And one thing my mom has always preached is just like traveling to different areas and talking to different people. And so we would travel all over California when we were little, and that helped me too empathize with people from all types of backgrounds, and no matter what their sexuality was, because California is very liberal about
Mm-hmm.
that. So that's always been around, and yeah, so I think it does matter where a person lives.
How can we show solidarity appropriately? Like you were mentioning not being a huge fan of the white privilege situation, but
Mhm.
those of us who are not, those of us who are white, like what do I say? Those of us who are white, like what can we do, or just not black, or anyone who wants to show um, support to in the Black Lives Matter sort of situation um, idea. How do we? What's an appropriate way to show solidarity?
Well, according to the Black Lives Matter activists, there's almost no way you could do that other than listen to their demands, and listen to them tell you what to do, and to, like, cower to their every demand. So I think it's impossible to make them happy, because on one end you have Black Lives Matter activists saying, you know, your silence is violence, against black people. And then on another hand, you have those who are saying that you shouldn't be talking during this time, and you should allow Black voices to be amplified and to speak on these issues. So that they make the environment to where, as no matter if you're white, no matter if you're Hispanic, or whatever, you can't really um, truly have that conversation with them, and you can't ask questions. When I posted that Venn diagram where it showed that you could have all of these different beliefs at one time, many people, no matter if they're Black, white, Hispanic, Indian, they came to me and they were like, "Hey, like, I'm so happy that there's someone out here saying that, because like I felt for the longest like I couldn't say anything because people would jump on me about it, or people were messaging me saying I should post this, and that if I don't post this, then I'm this bad person, and I don't think that that's right, and that's cultivated by the um, social justice mentality, that's and the critical theory stuff that's at the foundation of Black Lives Matter, and that's the reason why I wouldn't associate myself with them, nor would I think that any um, good conversation or any productive conversations could come out of that. And I don't think that you could truly find solidarity with that type of crowd. You have to find it with other critical thinking individuals who are willing to ask questions and to listen to you, and not just throw demands at you due to your skin color.
So we focus a bit on like the left or far left thinking that has the activist sort of mindset. Now, what about those on the right who are like, oh, there's no more racism? Like,
Yeah, I mean, they're just as crazy. I think, you know,
we've got to mention them. We've got to be
yeah, of
balanced here.
course, of
Yeah,
course, of
yeah,
course. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, or those who are just focusing on the rioting and looting, but not focusing at all on the peaceful protests or the fact that um, George Floyd was murdered unjustly. Yeah, I mean, those people are crazy too. And um, but what I find is that they're usually a very, very, very small minority compared to what is usually on the left. But even when it comes to them, I think a lot of times the identity stuff is what blinds them. I try my best to talk to people on the far right, far left, people in the middle who are really on the fence, like about every issue. Like I try to talk to everybody, and for the most part, I have really productive conversations because we do come away with common ground on something. We may not agree on most things, but we agree on something. So, what I notice about those who are like, "Oh, racism isn't a thing anymore," I think I think they have the same ideological blindfold as those on the left who blame everything on racism, you know? So they're two sides of the same coin, basically.
Okay, so it seems to me like you look back at the 60s and the civil rights protests and Dr. King and his wonderful speech and the things he said and fought for. It seems really, and again, I am like however much past the generation who was there, so I might be off in this, but in hindsight, it seems very clear what was needed. And I actually did hear, I listened to Coleman Hughes interview John McWhorter yesterday, and they mentioned about how the civil rights, I think that's where I heard it. It's one of those where I know I heard it from someone, but I think it was them, about how the civil rights movement had specific demands.
Hmm.
Integration of buses, schools,
Yeah,
restaurants.
they had a whole plan. They had everything like laid out of what they expected.
Okay, so it seems clear cut. Again, hindsight is 2020, but it does seem very clear cut to me. Nowadays, it seems very complicated, and there's a lot of things that are, yeah, they're not really clear. So what is that? Why is it so much more complicated now?
I think part of it is the glorification of being emotional and arguing from emotion. You know, a lot of people, what happens is they look at Martin Luther King and they forget that he had plans. He had a process of going to congressmen or going to get certain laws passed, whether or not you agree with those laws. And today, there's no process or no end goal there. It's just everything is racist, and we must tear down everything and reform it under this critical theory banner that they fall under. And I just find that to be really destructive. And we're seeing that in the academic system, with the affirmative action and how things are going there, and many things that I plan to speak on a lot later on, through my experiences and many others. But yeah, it's. I just think the lack of planning comes from their glorification of emotion and style over substance and planning.
Okay, what would be something that you see that could use reform that isn't style, that is more substantial?
That Black Lives Matter argue for.
No, that you just see something in America that could be doing better with regards to like race relations, or like with for black people to advance in society better or have a better quality of life, if there
Oh,
is anything.
oh yeah, yeah. There's many. I mean, first, like, get rid of the welfare state. I think that has done a lot of harm to Black people and stagnated them, because it gives incentives to families, or the lack of families, to have the government as the father, and to have this single mother as the the other parent. And when that happens, especially in the Black community, there's a lot of stagnation that goes on. And I would also get rid of affirmative action programs.
And
And
why is that?
well, one is unconstitutional. I don't think that's a constitutional thing. We're not supposed to discriminate on the basis of race, but affirmative action weasels its way through there through these moral justifications, that what has happened in the past to blacks justifies discriminating against whites and Asians today. And we see that with like what Harvard has done with Asian applicants, how they raise their standards, or they say they need a higher personality score, even though their grades are great. And they were sued about that, even though they Harvard won that case. But I just think the affirmative action programs are doing more damage than they are helping. And to get rid of that, it raises the standards. And when you raise the standards at these schools, or just in general, it makes people have to try to do that, and it creates less incentives to be like lacking in those skills or whatnot. And that's the reason why before these programs were introduced, there were a lot of Black people who were employed. There were a lot of Black people getting an education, before all of this was applied. So once we saw that the lack of fathers in the household, and the lack of education that many Blacks were having, we saw this trend, of more crime happening, and um, just disparate outcomes in many ways. So yeah, I think those are the two biggest things. But yeah, people just have to, I think, focus more on families, and the culture has to change to value education, and then value the hardworking process that many of their ancestors had, or civil rights era and pre-civil rights era. Um, One of my biggest inspirations is Booker T. Washington, because he had this view that, um, I mean, I don't agree with him on everything, of course, but he had this view that Black people should focus on what they can do for themselves first, and be educated and all this other stuff, and then worry about the systemic stuff and fighting things politically. Except I think he was more extreme in the sense of he didn't believe in fighting things politically at all, really. Um, but of course, I believe that people should fight politically, but more of it falls on the individual and the person.
So yeah, with regards to education, I have heard um again, this is I have heard yesterday in the podcast on Coleman's channel about
Mhm.
about how there were high schools that were what was one of them called? Like
Was it that one in Washington D.C.?
yes, that one. Was it, it
Mhm.
wasn't called Dartmouth, but it started with a D. Do you know what I'm
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about?
I remember the one you're talking
Yeah,
about,
but
and
they
Thomas
did
Sowell talk about it
yeah, yeah,
too a
they
little
did
bit.
better than many other schools competing. And it was all black, and it
Hmm.
was in like the 20s and 30s. And
Yeah, it was.
yeah, and then integration happened, and the teachers didn't like teaching the black kids, and they were pretty terrible to them. So then teachers and school wasn't a safe place to try. So why try at all? And so this is the 60s plus, and that's sort of where the results of this has happened. And yeah, it sounds like it's um a result of racism. So like the
Mhm.
race, so that I do think that history is very important in understanding why people are where they are today, even collectively.
Mhm.
That's important. But it's something that we can't change now because we can't go back in time to change how the integration went with regards to equality and treating people all the students well. But I know that you sorry, you just answered about the individual needs to pursue
No,
but
no, I think
in
that's
this.
that's a good addition because like the thing is, what a lot of people don't understand is that there are trade-offs and not solutions. I think Thomas Sowell says that. And like let's say for integration, like yeah, integration may be great in many ways, but there are a lot of costs to that, such as what you just said when it came to, white teachers not wanting to teach, and then the hostile environment for black students, and how a lot of this forced integration was bad on behalf of many black kids. So like we just have to be aware of the cost of every program, every so-called solution that comes into play, no matter if it's now or in history. And those examples you gave are great examples of that.
I just stole them from the podcast I listened to. But it was good. It was good prep for
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
It sounds like you don't take things even if they were done to you in a racist manner. It sounds like you wouldn't take them personally.
That's accurate. Yeah.
You're like, that's accurate.
Yeah,
So
that's accurate.
how do you how?
Well, it's just kind of like when you know of a person's life, for instance, and if you knew someone had a bad day, for instance, like maybe like their mom died and they got a flat tire or something, and you were the very first person to say something off color to them, and then they just went in, and when you knew about the previous facts that their mother died and they had a flat tire, you would be like, oh, okay, I see what it is. It's because they're having a pretty bad day. You don't take it as personally. You might be like, oh, that kind of hurts, but you
But the
still
bad day
wouldn't.
didn't make them racist though.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. But when it comes to racism, to me, that is a taught thing that comes from not having experiences around other races and not good experiences. Because like, who is to say that every interaction that a certain racist person with another person from another race has been a bad experience, like I'm sure there are many black people with bad experiences of white people, I'm and vice versa. So I know that it's a lack of experience and a lack of critical thinking skills, to be honest with you, because it's like, how could you not understand, like, basic biology, and to know that we have a lot more similarities and differences, and my race doesn't define my character. You could find bad character in any race, and you could find horrible people of any race. So that's the reason why I don't take it as personally as many others do, because I understand where it comes from, mostly, at least.
a space of ignorance.
Yeah.
And do you think the way that you then act when someone does treat you in a racist manner, do you think that you're then sort of proving them wrong by not being whatever it is that they think you are, kind of thing?
Oh, 100%. I've done that whole reverse psychology thing before where I'm still kind even though they're saying things like, you know, like I remember talking about IQ to a whole bunch of people in the far right, and a whole bunch of them screaming at me like, "You're only in physics because of affirmative action."
Yeah, yeah,
They'll say
yeah.
something, and and I'm still like, I don't pay any mind to it, but I'm still like attacking their points. And then a couple of them will come over and like either they'll defend me outright, like say, "Hey, don't say that," or they'll just start talking to me more, and then they'll apologize later, like, "Hey, I didn't mean to say that," like, that, or that was wrong for me to say that, or something like that. I've had many of those interactions before, so I know it works to not give in to people being racist or whatnot. And that doesn't mean I'm perfect with it. Like, it may be a time where I punch someone in the face because of it, but I'm mostly understanding of it because I know where it comes from.
Okay, you really are. You sound a lot like that attitude. Is it Daryl Davies? Daryl Davis,
I don't think I know who that is.
the one who befriends the KKK members.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
I have to.
I saw a documentary on him, I think, or something
Yeah,
like.
yeah. He kind of. I mean, he literally is like, let's be friends,
Yeah, and
KKK.
I would love to do something like that one day. Like
Really?
I'm comfortable enough doing that. Yeah.
And you're in Atlanta right now?
Yeah, I'm
Well,
in
you can
Atlanta.
start tomorrow. I mean, okay, maybe okay.
Like, you're
Maybe
in a
that's
hotbed.
unfair. Maybe that's unfair of me to say because you're in the South.
Yeah. I mean, believe it or not, it's crazy because like when I moved to Atlanta, that was one of my questions. I was like, I wonder if there are a lot of hate groups here. But believe it or not, there's, I think, a lot more hate groups in California than there are in Georgia.
Really?
And yeah, and I'm talking about like white nationalists or those type of hate groups that you would name. So yeah,
Why do you think
I
that
found that,
is?
I don't know. I think there's a hidden part of California that's very. I think California really should be like two different states because of course you have the very
Oh,
liberal minded
I've heard
people.
this. Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah, you have the very liberal minded people who are
LA.
on the, yeah, and then you have those who are liberal minded, but they the way they talk about other cultures and other people resembles the far right.
Okay.
And then you have people on the right, but they're secretly on the right because in California, being openly on the right is a bad thing.
Oh, right.
And then you have people who are on the far right, and of course they're like in hiding too. So
Yeah.
it's very weird in California, whereas over here it's like conservative or Democrat. I mean, conservative or liberal,
Yeah, yeah.
Democrat,
Republican or
Republican.
yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
so, yeah,
It's a little bit more like here's our political affiliation and oh, that's interesting.
yeah.
You would be interested in
I would
doing
love
that.
to do that. I would
Why?
love to do that because like I'm really interested in how people arrive at their conclusions. I think that's what really gets me. It's just like, how did you get to this, hateful place? Where you think of people with such a broad brush. I think that's the reason why I talk about, um, the problem with promoting social justice stuff and all this stuff. Like, I talk with them because a lot of people are like, you shouldn't even talk to, uh, people on the far right, or you shouldn't talk to people on the far left. No, like I want to know how they get to their conclusions, and then where we have common ground at, and then to work on that because like you can't persuade everyone, but at the same time you could at least understand where they're coming from, and then you kind of understand why there's a group behind that.
Okay.
I understand why there's a group behind like people on the far right. I understand why there's a social justice movement and stuff, but that doesn't mean that I agree with, most of what they agree at their foundations. It doesn't mean that I agree with their method of solving these issues. So,
Okay, so you mentioned a book called Acting White.
yeah.
So that I'm gonna guess, or I'm gonna say that that's a recommendation. Would you recommend it?
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely recommend our if I can I recommend a
Yeah, that's
couple
what I was gonna
others too?
ask. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, that's literally what I was gonna. You knew where I was going with that one. So yeah.
Yeah, so my book recommendations would be Acting White. I forgot the author's name. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I'll look it up.
Conflict of Visions by Thomas Sowell, because it basically covers why the left thinks what they do, why the right thinks what they do, and why they clash so much,
Okay.
um, and why visions outweigh, you know, practice and facts and then all that other stuff. Intellectuals in Society by Thomas Sowell is a really scary book in many ways because it shows you how much um, people in academia like have power to change the public's perception of things. Like the reason why we hear about social justice and systemic racism and all that, it started in academia. These are things that academics came up with first, or white privilege and all this other stuff. Academics started this, and they will put papers out, and no matter if they're substantiated or not, people follow behind it because academics kind of run the scope and how the public thinks about certain
Right.
things. So that book was really eye opening for me. The Righteous Minds by Jonathan Haidt
Yeah.
um, is a really good one. It made me more calm in an understanding when it comes to why people differ on like religion and
Mm.
uh, secularism and um, politics and all this other stuff. Uh, if you want to learn about affirmative action and what it's done in terms of like how bad it is, the first one I would recommend is Mismatch by it's a whole bunch of authors, like Mismatch by Sanders and many other authors.
But the
And
title will be
then
enough to probably find.
yeah, it should, yeah, because there's a couple of really popular books called Mismatch. So, but if you say Mismatch by Sanders, I think it will pop up. Yeah, those are the top books I would say that are relevant to today's conversation.
Okay, cool. Okay. I think, unless you had anything you wanted to bring up, I
Oh
think,
no, no,
okay,
yeah,
this is a good space to end. I mean, it doesn't like it's like, oh, solved. It's all solved. It's not quite, but I do think that it's important to have, well, the very fact that I'm like, hey, I'm a white lady. I would like to talk with someone with a perspective that I don't have, and that's why it worked out nicely that you shared that little
yeah,
Venn
and
diagram.
I think your platform is really great for that reason. You invite a lot of people on that you don't agree with, like on most things or some things, and you always challenge and provide like another perspective towards things. So that's
Mm.
why I love watching your um, episodes and things of that
Oh,
nature.
thanks.
And that's why I love your questions on Twitter. Like I always like try to catch up with them and see all the questions you ask and stuff because they're
Oh
really eye
man,
opening.
I
Yeah.
yeah, some of them are like, oh, this is a good one. Like I think that, but no, it's only because it's balanced with, if you were gonna like try to share your favorite show with only one episode, which episode would it be? Like that's
Yeah,
like the variety.
yeah, and we need that balance. We
Okay,
need that balance of people talking about like political things and then people talking about very casual things such as
okay,
your
yeah.
favorite show.
Okay,
I
then
mean, I
guilty.
think it's great.
Yes, I'm guilty there. Okay, so that's good. Okay, that's why I laughed. I'm like, oh yeah, they're like super deep. But okay, actually, I'll probably try to find someone else who's like pro Black Lives Matter, just to just to
Yeah,
counter,
yeah,
and it'll
yeah.
be,
No, that's good.
yeah. And I'll have to hear your thoughts after. So if I can find
Yeah,
someone.
definitely.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks
please
so
do.
much. Yeah, thank you for
Yeah,
chatting, Eric.
thank you for having me on.